What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. I am excited to present to you episode 1 of 5 old cards recreated, and of course we're in March of 2020 right now, so this is going to be 5 old cards recreated for the Pokemon trading card game in 2020. This is kind of a what if video, but I think it's really fun to think about all of these old cards and what if they came back into the game after so many years. We've seen Pokemon reprint a lot of old cards or reimagine a lot of old cards. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and we're going to look at 5 really cool cards and think about what if they were in the game today. Leave it in the comments below if you knew what the card in the thumbnail was before we got to it in the video. And before we get there, shout out to PotownStore.com, my lovely sponsor and the best place for you to get PTCGO codes online. Use code Celio for 5% off. Also, shout out to FlipsideGaming.com, where I write free articles, and you can use code Celio, all caps, for 10% off on your next order, $10 or more. So if you guessed that that card was Cessation Crystal, then you were correct, and Cessation Crystal is the first card we're looking at today. This card is from Crystal Guardians. It came out 14 years ago in 2006, and Crystal Guardians is such a nostalgic set for me. It had so many cool cards. The pack art was amazing. I just loved this era of Pokemon, so I often think about a lot of cards from the 2006, 2007, 2008 era, and we'll be looking at a lot of cards from that era in this video and in future episodes of this series. So Cessation Crystal is a Pokemon tool, and of course it has the tool text, except it has some exclusions for Pokemon EX. I'm going to read the card, how it was originally created, and then I'll read you guys what I would create it as today. So, Cessation Crystal's original text was, attach Cessation Crystal to one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX that doesn't already have a Pokemon tool attached to it. If the Pokemon Cessation Crystal is attached to is a Pokemon EX, discard this card. And then the effect of the card, as long as Cessation Crystal is attached to an active Pokemon, each player's Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, can't use any Pokepowers or Pokebodies. So there's a few things off the bat you might notice we'll have to change if this card was reprinted. One, Pokemon EX aren't currently in standard format and aren't currently being printed in new sets, so we would probably be updating that with GX or EX and GX or even V Pokemon. And also, Pokepowers and Pokebodies haven't been around for a while. They're both just abilities now, so that would also have to be changed. So over on the left here, we have my reimagination of the card. I would have the top text read, attach Cessation Crystal to one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX and GX, that doesn't already have a tool attached to it. If the Pokemon Cessation Crystal is attached to is a Pokemon EX or GX, discard, discard. And then the effect would be, as long as Cessation Crystal is attached to an active Pokemon, each player's Pokemons, both yours and your opponent's, have no abilities. And I think this would be played in standard format. It might be played and expanded. Of course, we are getting a tool scrapper effect item soon in the standard format. But I think this could be a really cool card to have around. I think it could have been cool in the past recent formats. Ability lock is always great, and especially when it's an ability lock that your opponent can reasonably get out of, but they might have to tech extra cards to get out of. This would kind of be like a Garbotoxin effect, but on any Pokemon, but only in the active. So it could have some cool interactions, and it could create some techs in the meta to tech against this card. I think it would be really great in the game, and I would like to see something like this recreated or reprinted. Next, we've got Cursed Stone, a stadium card that a lot of you might not know about unless you were playing back then. It's never been reprinted. I don't think we've ever seen a stadium card with this effect after Cursed Stone. Of course, Shrine of Punishment has a similar effect, but definitely different. So Cursed Stone was a stadium card from Legend Makers, also in 2006, and it has the usual stadium text up top. You can't play if there's a Cursed Stone already in play. And the effect of this stadium was at any time between turns, each player puts 1 damage counter on his or her Pokemon that has a Poke Power. So back then, of course, Poke Power and Poke Bodies were different. They weren't both under the umbrella of abilities like it is now. And also just some of the text would change because they update how they write card effects every few years or so. So my reimagination of this card would be between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon that has an ability, both yours and your opponent's. So the effect really wouldn't be changing, except we would be taking Poke Power and making it all abilities. And like I said, just some text cleanup to make it a little less clunky. And more like Pokemon is creating the cards to have this kind of text now. I do think this card would be played. There are so many abilities in Standard and Expanded, and when Shrine of Punishments came out, and Shrine of Punishments was a reprint or a reimagination of Desert Ruins, another old Stadium card. When Shrine of Punishments came out and it put a damage counter on EX and GX between turns, it definitely made the meta reconsider playing a lot of GXs and EXs, and there were some decks that were focused on just single prize attackers. I think Cursed Stone could maybe make the meta focus on Pokemon without abilities. So even if it was GX Pokemon and V Pokemon and V Max Pokemon, maybe the meta would have some decks that focused on not having a lot of abilities in play to get extra mileage out of Cursed Stone and to have an extra advantage out of it and not put the damage on your own Pokemon. So again, Cursed Stone, it's just the kind of card that I like because it has a unique effect that another card in the format is not doing, and it could also potentially sway the meta away from just one kind of deck or only big Pokemon with abilities on them. Maybe you would want to attack with a lot of Pokemon that have no abilities and just have 1 or 2 ability Pokemon on the bench for support. So Cursed Stone, kind of like the Crystal we looked at, I do think it would be played. Of course, there are easy ways to counter it, like Chaotic Swell, Faba, just playing heavier stadium counts, but I do think it would be a pretty solid card in today's Standard format. Next, we've got Power Spray from Platinum in 2009, still over a decade ago. And this one, I really think the reimagining of this one could go a few different ways. Specifically on that last sentence of text, which we will get to. If you did not play when Power Spray was around, and you've never played retro decks from this era, I highly suggest trying it out. The SP era was one of my favorite eras to compete in. Just the entire Team Galactic's invention array of tools and supporters were so cool, and there were a lot of Pokemon that did really cool things, and they weren't necessarily one-shotting each other. You were healing or locking or hitting the bench. A lot of cool things in that era, and we'll get to more of cards from that era, I'm sure, in future episodes of the series. But so for Power Spray, Team Galactic's Invention G103 Power Spray, it was an item card. Of course, back then they were called trainers, but it was an item card. You may play this card during your opponent's turn when your opponent's Pokemon uses any Poke Power. Prevent all effects of that Poke Power. This counts as that Pokemon using its Poke Power. If you have 2 or less Pokemon SP, which were a special kind of Pokemon back then, they were Galactic's Pokemon. If you have 2 or less Pokemon SP in play, you can't play this card. So you need at least 3 Pokemon SP in play to play this card down. So you can't just throw 4 Power Spray into every deck. That would have been absurd. So there's a few things we have to fix to make this card function in today's game. So first and foremost, the Poke Power. Back then, like I've mentioned, Poke Power and Poke Bodies were separate, and Poke Bodies were the more constant effects, things that happened when a certain situation procced it, and Poke Powers were things you activated, like playing down a Shaman for setup, or playing down a Dedenne for Dede change, or using Chinchino's Make-A-Do to discard a card and draw 2. Those were all Poke Powers. So now that abilities are an umbrella of Poke Powers and Poke Bodies all in one, we would have to change this text a little. So in my reimagination, the card would go a little like this. You may play this card during your opponent's turn when your opponent's Pokemon uses any ability that can only be used once per turn. So this would give you the the ability to cancel an ability that can only be used once per turn. This would be like Dead A Change, so you would cancel that as the Dead A GX got played down. You could cancel Chinchino's Make Do. You could cancel Intrepid Sword on Zacian V, but you could not cancel anything that procced multiple times a turn, like Frostmoth's Rain Dance ability, since if you canceled that, they could just go ahead and use it again. So I wanted in this reimagination to cancel any ability that could only be used once per turn, because I'm sure there would be some Pokebody-ish effects that were never really meant to be canceled by Power Spray, and it wouldn't really function in the way it was intended to. So I think this would be a great way to reimagine the card. And then, of course, the last sentence, which originally was, if you have 2 or less Pokemon SP in play, you can't play this card. I was thinking, so you could go a couple different ways. The way I have here is, if you have 2 or less Pokemon V in play, you can't play this card. So I think this would be more likely if Pokemon were to reprint it, because they don't want to tell you not to play their new mechanic of Pokemon, right? So they wouldn't say you can only play this card if you have no Pokemon V in play, because I think that would deter people from buying and using and looking for the new Pokemon V, which doesn't sound like something they would do. It would probably be more likely that the card would need you to have more of this new mechanic of Pokemon in play. Another idea I had, maybe if you have 2 or less Galarian Pokemon in play, you can't play this card, or 2 or less Galarian and Alolan Pokemon in combination in play, you can't play this card. So a couple different things you could probably do with that last part. But Power Spray is such a cool card because you don't really get a lot of interaction like this in the Pokemon trading card game like you do in, say, Magic, where there's instant speed spells and there's cancels and counters. So there are very few cards like this in the Pokemon trading card game's history, and I would love to see Power Spray come back into the game in some shape or form. Next, we've got Call Energy from Majestic Dawn in 2008, 12 years ago, and this card is often reminisced as one of the favorite energy cards of Pokemon trading card games history. People love playing old retro decks with this in it. So Call Energy, the original text of the card: Call Energy provides 1 colorless energy. Once during your turn, if the Pokemon Call Energy is attached to is your active Pokemon, you may search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon, put them onto your bench. If you do, shuffle your deck and your turn ends. So kind of like a Tropical Beach or an Intrepid Sword, where you're getting to draw cards, and this card has to be in play. It's not a card that you play down and then end your turn, except it's searching you out 2 specific cards, which are Pokemon, and putting them onto your bench and then ending your turn. So it kind of gives any Pokemon a Call for Family like attack without actually having to have a Pokemon with the Call for Family attack. So Call Energy was a super cool card, very, very good in its time. And the way I would reimagine it would be something like this. Call Energy provides 1 colorless energy. Once during your turn, if Call Energy is attached to a Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, GX, or V, and that Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. If you do, shuffle your deck and your turn ends. So I would really be happy if this was the way the card was brought back, if it were to be reprinted and reimagined in some way. Now, I do think Call Energy is probably unlikely to get a reprint or a reimagination anytime soon, since we are getting Capture Energy soon in a new standard set. And what Capture Energy does, it provides you with 1 colorless energy, and when you attach it to a Pokemon, you can search your deck for a basic Pokemon and bench it. So it's kind of like Call Energy, but it doesn't get 2 Pokemon. You can't use it every turn if you want, and it doesn't end your turn. So there are definitely big differences between the 2 cards, but I think Capture Energy is kind of like it's almost like a reimagining of Call Energy in some way, this Capture Energy. So I really love Call Energy. I'd love to see it get reprinted, but when I saw Capture Energy, I kind of thought maybe this is the best we're going to get for now in terms of a Call Energy reprint. So we've looked at 3 trainers, 1 special energy, and the last card we're going to look at is a Pokemon, and that Pokemon is Spiritomb from Arceus set in 2009. So this Spiritomb had a Pokebody and 2 attacks. One of the attacks were free, and like I said, Pokebodies aren't around anymore. They're now abilities. So we'll go through and read the ability or the Pokebody and the attacks, and then we'll look at the reimagination of these. So Spiritomb was very, very popular. It was very strong. It was kind of a card people hated to see because of its ability, or its Pokebody, Keystone Seal. As long as Spiritomb is your active Pokemon, each player can't play any trainer cards from his or her hand. Now, you'll see in the reimagining, I've changed that over to item cards, since trainer cards used to be item cards, and now, if this was made today, it would most likely say item cards instead of trainers. And then it had the ability, or the attack, for free, you could use Darkness Grace. Search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon, and put it onto that Pokemon. This counts as evolving that Pokemon. If you do, put 1 damage counter on Spiritomb, shuffle your deck afterwards. So really the only thing I'm changing here for Spiritomb is its ability. Keystone Seal, we're changing it over to an ability, and as long as Spiritomb is your active Pokemon, each player can't play any item cards from his or her hand. So it locks you and your opponent out of item cards, much like the Vileplume you might be familiar with. And then it allows you to set up evolution Pokemon for free. By just putting a damage counter on Spiritomb, and that's your attack. So this is kind of like a nerfed Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor tag team if you're comparing it to cards from this era, our current cards. But I think Darkness Grace would actually almost make evolution Pokemon have a chance in our standard format, and there's not many evolution-based decks or decks that are running some lines of evolution Pokemon in them. There are, of course, the Obstagoon decks and the Cinccino Mill decks, but you're not really basing your decks around attacking evolution Pokemon. If you're looking at the meta as a whole, it's mostly big basics. So I'd love to see a card like this that comes out and gives a little bit more of an advantage to evolution-based decks that allows you to lock each player out of item cards, maybe slowing the game down for a few turns, and then you're also evolving your Pokemon up in the meantime, actually setting up, and maybe you and your opponent can have some sort of a strategic game. So I think the Spiritomb would be super cool to have back, but I can't guarantee if it would be enough to make evolution-based decks come back up to tier 1 where they once were in the past. So those were the 5 old Pokemon TCG cards I wanted to look at today and imagine them recreated for 2020. So Cessation Crystal, Power Spray, Cursed Stone, Call Energy, and Spiritomb from Arceus. Tell me which one of these you would like to see recreated or reprinted in a standard set in 2020. Which of these would you like to have back into the game the most? I hope you all enjoyed this video. As always, check out PotownStore.com and FlipsideGaming.com. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.